ever put total faith in a weather app, only to like end up totally soaked at a friend's outdoor wedding?
Hmm.
Or maybe you were so sure your team would win, like despite their losing streak, that you put money on it.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, we've all been there, right?
It's so easy to get tricked by those things.
Today we're diving deep into why our gut feeling about probabilities is often, well, dead wrong. And how to maybe make smarter decisions even, when we're not sure about the outcome.
What I think is so fascinating about this is it's not just about like those occasional bad calls we make, right? It's like literally about how our brains are wired.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we humans, we're naturally prone to like being overconfident.
Hmm.
And we're also kind of averse to risk, even when, statistically taking a calculated risk actually makes more sense.
Okay, so it's not just me then.
No, not at all.
There's an actual scientific reason why I'm terrible at predicting, like, coin tosses.
Precisely. And this article we're looking at from NOAA Climate.gov,
Right.
it uses this like brilliant analogy, betting on basketball games,
Okay.
to really show how we can move from like just going with our gut to a more, structured approach. They call it a decision support system.
A decision support system.
Yeah, or DSS for short.
Okay.
Think of it like your own personalized playbook for like handling uncertainty.
A playbook, huh? So less like blindly shooting hoops and more like strategizing like a coach.
Yes.
I like it.
Exactly. It's all about making those tough calls based on, logic and reason and not just a hunch. So the article uses the Chicago Bulls as an example. Let's say, you love to bet on their games.
Sure.
But you want to be smarter about it, right?
Right.
First step is you got to define a super clear event, something with like a yes or no outcome.
Okay.
Will the Bulls win their next game? Simple, right?
Straightforward enough. But then how does that translate into an actual decision? Like, what do I do with that?
That's where it gets really interesting, I think. That's where the thresholds of actionability come in.
Thresholds of actionability.
It's a mouthful, I know.
Yeah.
But it basically means like you're deciding beforehand how much you're willing to bet, based on how likely you think it is that the Bulls will actually win.
So I'm guessing this is where like my own personal risk tolerance comes into play.
Absolutely. Like, let's say you're a cautious bettor.
Okay.
Your DSS, your playbook, might look like this. If you estimate there's a 60% chance the Bulls are going to win,
Yeah.
you only bet a small amount, maybe like $10.
Okay.
But if the probability jumps to like 80%, you bump it up to $20 because now you're feeling more confident.
So I'm basically creating like a system for myself.
Exactly.
Taking the emotion out of the equation.
Exactly.
But okay, how do I even determine those probabilities in the first place? Do I just throw darts at a board?
Well, it would be a lot easier if it were that simple.
Right.
No, the idea is it's not about just like random guessing, right?
Right.
You can actually use things like historical data. So like, how the Bulls performed in the past. You can look at expert opinions. There's even like risk tolerance questionnaires you can take.
Sure.
And all of this helps you come up with like a more informed estimate. And then you can use those to set those thresholds in your DSS.
Well, it's about combining like real information with like my own, personal risk appetite.
Exactly.
Okay. I'm already starting to see how this could apply to more than just like basketball bets.
Oh, absolutely.
Like in my everyday life.
Right. And what's really remarkable is that this article we're talking about, they actually tested this.
Oh, wow.
They ran these simulations of, different betting strategies.
Okay.
Over 1,000 basketball seasons. Can you believe that?
Wow. That's a lot of basketball.
Right. And they compared like just betting randomly to using a DSS, first with perfect knowledge. Like they knew exactly what was going to happen. And then with good but not perfect predictions.
Okay, so what happened? Spill the tea. Like, did those with a crystal ball clean up?
Well, as you might expect, if you have perfect knowledge, you're going to make the most money, right?
Right.
But here's the really interesting part. Even with predictions that weren't perfect, the people who were using a DSS still did way better than those who were just betting randomly.
Wait, so you're saying even if my predictions aren't like flawless, having some kind of system is still better than just going with my gut?
Yes. That's exactly what it's showing.
That's actually kind of mind-blowing.
It is. And it highlights this like crucial point. We, as humans, we tend to put so much emphasis on the times when our gut feeling was right.
Right. Like, oh, I knew it. I had a feeling.
Exactly. We remember all the lucky streaks, those winning hunches.
Oh, right.
But over time, if you're relying solely on those hunches,
Yeah.
it's a recipe for more losses than wins.
Oh, that's really interesting. So it's about like playing the odds strategically,
Yes.
not like chasing that like thrill of the unpredictable.
You got it.
Yeah.
Now, what if we take this whole idea of using probabilities for making better decisions beyond, like, basketball?
Okay.
What about something as complex and impactful as, like, predicting El Nino?
Okay, yeah. For those who maybe didn't catch our deep dive on El Nino, it's a like a climate pattern with like massive global implications. And yeah, it involves a whole lot of, probabilities and predictions and all of that.
And just like our basketball example, those predictions,
Yeah.
they're never perfect.
Right.
But that's where something called calibrated forecast models come in.
Calibrated models. Okay, you're gonna have to like break this down for me like I'm back in like high school science class.
Okay, so imagine, instead of predicting just one basketball game, you're trying to predict, like, a whole season. With all the, like, ups and downs and crazy stuff that happens, right?
Right.
Calibrated models. They're kind of like having a seasoned coach by your side.
Okay.
Because they've seen it all, right? And they're created using tons and tons of historical data, which basically helps them, like, estimate, what are the chances of different things happening.
Okay.
Like, is this going to be a winning season? Is it going to be a losing season?
Okay.
But they can do it with, like, a much higher degree of accuracy.
So instead of just like relying on, someone's gut feeling about like a certain player or whatever, we're talking about a more like data-driven approach.
Exactly. And when it comes to something as like crazy complex as El Nino, right?
Right.
Where you're dealing with ocean temperatures and wind patterns and like global weather impacts, like it gets really wild.
Right.
Having those calibrated models, it's super crucial. Because they give us this, like, more reliable framework for figuring out, like, okay, what are the actual chances of, different El Nino phases happening?
Yeah.
Like, are we going to have an El Nino year, a La Nina year?
Right.
Or is it going to be, like, neutral conditions?
So it's like having a more sophisticated playbook.
Exactly.
One that's, like, constantly, being updated and refined.
Yeah. And the really cool thing about these calibrated models, I think, is that they're honest,
What do you mean?
Like, they don't pretend to be perfect.
Yeah.
They acknowledge that, like, when you're trying to predict complex systems, like our climate, for example, there's always going to be uncertainty baked into that.
Right.
But by incorporating these models into a DSS, we can actually make, like, way more informed decisions, even when we don't have, a crystal ball to tell us exactly what's going to happen.
It's kind of reminding me of those, like, choose-your-own-adventure books we were talking about before, where it's like,
Oh, yeah.
you reach, like, a fork in the road,
Right.
but instead of like blindly picking a path, you've got this like guide, which is like, I guess in this case, our calibrated model.
Yeah.
That's like kind of giving you the odds of like what might lie ahead.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And just like those books, sometimes even with the best guide, you still might, take a wrong turn. Right.
Right.
End up on a path that maybe you didn't want to be on.
Right.
But over time,
Yeah.
using that guide is going to lead to, more of those happy endings.
Right. So let's bring this back to like the real world for a second. Like, how are these calibrated models actually being used with El Nino?
Yeah, great question.
We're talking about more than just like predicting if I'm going to need an umbrella next week.
Well, yeah, this is way bigger than umbrellas.
Okay.
Think about, like, farmers, for example, in regions that are, like, heavily impacted by El Nino.
Okay, yeah.
By using a DSS that actually incorporates these calibrated models, they can make much smarter decisions about, like, when to plant, what kind of crops to grow, how to manage their, like, water resources, all based on, like, those probabilities of different El Nino scenarios.
That's huge. So we're talking about, like, potentially, like, mitigating, those negative impacts like droughts or floods just by, like, making smarter decisions.
Yes. That's exactly it. And it's not just agriculture either, right? We can use this for, like, managing water resources in cities, preparing for heat waves.
Wow.
Even predicting how diseases might spread, because even those things can be affected by climate patterns.
So I'm starting to see the bigger picture here.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about, like, winning some bets or like outsmarting the weather app. We're talking about, like, making better decisions, across the board when we're faced with things that are uncertain.
Yes.
Which feels incredibly relevant to, like, pretty much every aspect of life, wouldn't you say?
100%, yeah. And it doesn't just have to be, climate change. Think about applying this to something like your own personal finances. When you're making investment decisions and you're trying to, weigh the risks and the rewards.
Okay, yeah.
Or even, even something as, seemingly simple as planning a vacation.
Oh, tell me you're not about to take the fun out of planning a vacation.
No, not at all.
I thought we were done with those, rain-soaked wedding scenarios.
But think about it.
Yeah.
Instead of just, going on that sunny forecast and hoping for the best.
Yeah.
What if you used a DSS, one that, factored in historical weather patterns and gave you, the probabilities of different weather scenarios happening?
Okay.
You could, seriously up your chances of having, a truly enjoyable trip.
Okay. I'm, fully convinced. Sign me up for that vacation planning DSS.
Right.
But seriously, though, it's, kind of amazing how this whole concept can apply to, so many different parts of life, you know?
It really is. It's about, shifting your mindset from, okay, I think this is going to happen, to, okay, what are the actual chances of this happening?
Yeah.
And, what are my options based on that?
Right.
It's empowering, I think.
It's taking, control of the decision-making instead of, just feeling I don't know what's going to happen.
Yes, exactly. And that's, the big takeaway here, I think. We've all heard it a million times, right? Don't just trust your gut.
Right.
But this article actually gives us, a framework, gives us, a way to actually do that.
Okay.
Even with information that's not perfect, having a system, that decision support system, it can seriously, up your chances of having things turn out the way you want them to.
So it's not about, getting rid of uncertainty because, let's be real, that's never going to happen.
Right, exactly.
It's more about, how do we, navigate it, with a little more, I don't know, strategy.
Yes, yeah.
And a little less reliance on, those gut feelings, which, let's be honest, can be kind of all over the place.
Totally. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, I think we've given our listeners, a lot to, chew on today. We've gone from basketball bets to, El Nino. And we looked at it all, through this lens of, probabilities.
All right.
And, how to make smarter decisions when we're faced with the unknown.
And hopefully our listeners are thinking about, what are those areas in their own lives,
right,
where they could benefit from creating their own playbook, their own system for dealing with uncertainty, because it really can make a difference.
Absolutely. So to wrap things up, next time you're wrestling with a tough decision, remember what we talked about today.
Yeah.
Define that yes or no event, set those action thresholds, and then, take a leap.
Yeah, exactly.
Use a little bit of logic, maybe a little less gut, and hey, you might just surprise yourself.
Until next time, everybody, keep those minds curious and those decisions strategic.